In the quiet town of Gwalior, where secrets are often buried beneath the mundane routines of everyday life, a mother's forbidden affair spirals into a deadly web of lies and betrayal. As her secret unravels, the consequences are devastating, and there's no turning back. Nisha Verma grew up in the small, bustling town of Gwalior, nestled in the heart of Madhya Pradesh. From a young age, her life had been one of routine and simplicity. The eldest daughter of a modest family, Nisha spent her childhood helping her mother in the kitchen, caring for her younger siblings, and excelling in her studies. Her family held traditional values, and while they encouraged her education, they always emphasized the importance of marriage as the ultimate goal for a woman. By her early 20s, Nisha had completed her degree in commerce but had no real aspirations to work. Her parents had begun seeking a suitable match for her, and although Nisha harbored dreams of a life filled with adventure and excitement, she knew that these dreams would remain just that. She was expected to follow the same path as her mother, grandmother, and countless women before her. Arjun Singh entered her life like a breath of fresh air. A constable in the local police force, Arjun hailed from a middle-class family that shared similar values to Nisha's. Tall, with a serious demeanor softened by kind eyes, Arjun was known for his dedication to his job and his calm, patient nature. Their introduction was arranged by their families, and while there was no instant spark of love, Nisha found Arjun's steady, dependable nature comforting. Their courtship was brief, as was the custom in their town. Nisha had been taught that marriage was not about romance or passion, but about companionship, stability, and respect. Arjun fit that mold perfectly. He was caring, dutiful, and respectful toward Nisha and her family. When he spoke to her, it was with a gentle authority that reassured her she would be well taken care of. Within months, they were married in a traditional Hindu ceremony. Nisha, dressed in a bright red sari with gold embroidery, looked every bit the perfect bride. As she sat beside Arjun, their families beaming with pride, Nisha silently wondered what the future held for her. She liked Arjun, but deep down, she longed for something more than the life she had been taught to desire. Yet she knew her duty, and she vowed to be a good wife. Life as Mrs. Arjun Singh began smoothly. Arjun continued his work as a constable, while Nisha settled into her role as a homemaker. A year into their marriage, they welcomed their son, Rohan, into the world. The little boy became the center of Nisha's universe, filling their home with laughter and joy. Nisha's days became a blur of cooking, cleaning, and caring for Rohan, while Arjun spent long hours at the police station or working extra shifts to provide for his family. Though Nisha loved Rohan deeply and appreciated Arjun's hard work, there was an emptiness inside her that she couldn't quite explain. Her life was stable, but the excitement and passion she once dreamed of seemed more distant with each passing day. Arjun was a good man, but their marriage lacked the fire that Nisha had secretly yearned for. In the quiet moments when Rohan was napping and the house was still, Nisha would find herself staring out of the window, watching the world go by. She wondered if this was all life had to offer, this predictable routine. The vibrant young woman who had once dreamed of more was now hidden beneath layers of responsibility and expectation. Then, one day, her life took an unexpected turn. When Karan Mehta, a charming new neighbor, moved in next door, Nisha's world was thrown into turmoil. Karan's arrival ignited something in her that had long been dormant, setting the stage for a chain of events that would unravel everything she once thought she knew about herself and her life. It started innocently enough. Karan Mehta, the new neighbor, was polite and friendly when he first moved in. He would greet Nisha with a smile whenever they crossed paths, often making small talk as he carried his groceries inside or tended to his garden. At first, Nisha thought nothing of it. He was just being neighborly. But over time, something in the way he looked at her lingered, making her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt in years. Karan was everything Arjun was not: charismatic, charming, and confident. He was several years younger than Nisha and had a carefree energy that was infectious. Unlike the steady predictability of her marriage, Karan's presence felt exciting, almost dangerous. He spoke to Nisha like she was someone worth knowing, asking about her life, her interests, and her dreams. It was something she hadn't experienced in a long time, being the center of someone's attention. The first time Karan came over, it was under the pretense of asking for advice on his new apartment. Nisha had helped him choose curtains, and they laughed about how terrible his decorating skills were. He thanked her profusely, and for the first time in years, Nisha felt a spark of excitement. That brief moment was enough to stir something inside her, something she thought had died a long time ago. Soon, Karen's visits became more frequent. At first, they were casual, innocent conversations about the weather or small favors here and there. But then the casual talks turned into longer, deeper conversations. He made her feel alive, reminding her of the dreams she had buried beneath her life as a wife and mother. Slowly, she began to look forward to his visits more than anything else in her day. One afternoon, Karen stopped by when Arjun was at work and Rohan was napping. There was something different in the air, a tension that neither of them acknowledged but both felt. As they sat together in her living room, the distance between them seemed to shrink with each passing second. Their conversation was light, but Nisha felt her pulse quicken, and she knew something was about to change. When Karan reached out to touch her hand, Nisha didn't pull away. The moment hung in the air, heavy with temptation. She knew it was wrong, that this was the line she should never cross, but the pull toward him was stronger than any rational thought. Before she could stop herself, she leaned in and their lips met in a kiss that sealed their fate. The affair began that day. Nisha was consumed by the thrill of it all, the rush of excitement she had been craving for so long. Each time she was with Karan, the dullness of her life with Arjun faded into the background. But deep down, Nisha knew there would be consequences. The weight of Nisha's secret affair began to grow heavier with each passing day. Though she tried to keep up the appearance of a devoted mother and wife, guilt gnawed at her every moment. She went through her daily routines as if nothing had changed, cooking meals, taking care of Rohan, and attending to Arjun's needs. But in the quiet moments, the reality of her double life crept into her thoughts. Each time she glanced at Rohan, her innocent 3-year-old son, a wave of fear washed over her. What if he somehow knew? What if, in his childlike way, he could sense the tension in the air? Nisha often found herself staring at him as he played with his toys, wondering how much longer she could keep her affair hidden. Rohan was her world, and the thought of anything disrupting his life terrified her. Her fear only intensified when Arjun mentioned hosting a small gathering at their home to celebrate the opening of his new plastic shop. It was a big step for him, a chance to build a better future for their family, and Nisha knew how much it meant to him. But for her, the idea of having people, including Karan, in their home sent her into a spiral of anxiety. What if someone noticed something between them? What if Karan let his guard down even for a second? The day of the gathering arrived, and their modest home buzzed with activity. Arjun had invited his colleagues, a few neighbors, and family friends. Nisha moved through the crowd, greeting guests and ensuring everything was perfect, but her heart raced with every passing minute. Karan had arrived earlier, blending in with the other guests, yet Nisha felt his eyes on her every time she entered the room. It made her feel both exhilarated and terrified at once. As the evening wore on, Nisha's mind whirled with dread. She felt trapped between the life she had with Arjun and the affair she couldn't seem to end. Every time she caught a glimpse of Karan across the room, the thrill of their secret sent a shiver down her spine. But the sight of Rohan playing with the other children kept her grounded in the reality of her situation. How could she betray her family like this? Midway through the evening, Nisha excused herself, her nerves frayed. She slipped away from the party, retreating to the terrace where Karan had followed her. The night sky twinkled above, but Nisha felt none of its peace. She found herself locked in an embrace with Karan, the weight of their forbidden relationship pressing on her chest. Just as they shared a brief kiss, a sound startled them. Nisha turned and, to her horror, saw Rohan standing in the doorway. His wide, innocent eyes stared up at her, his tiny hands clutching his toy truck. "Mommy?" Rohan's voice was soft, but it cut through Nisha like a blade. Her heart sank. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. She pulled away from Karan, her mind racing. How much had Rohan seen? Could he comprehend what he had witnessed? Panic surged through her as the implications of that moment threatened to overwhelm her. She rushed toward her son, kneeling in front of him, trying to act as if nothing had happened. Her voice trembled, betraying the fear clawing at her insides. As she took Rohan's hand, dread consumed her. What if he told Arjun? What if he mentioned seeing her with Karan? The delicate balance she had been trying to maintain now seemed on the verge of collapse. The fear of losing her son's innocence, her marriage, and everything she had worked for weighed heavily on her. For the first time, Nisha realized the walls of her carefully constructed life were crumbling faster than she could stop them. Nisha forced a smile, hoping to dismiss the gravity of the moment. She knelt down, pulling Rohan into a hug, but the comfort was lost on her. She felt hollow, knowing the boy in her arms had witnessed something no child should ever see. As Rohan squirmed, she gently pushed him away, searching his eyes for any sign of understanding. Inside, she felt the suffocating weight of dread. What had once been a fleeting escape from the mundane had turned into a nightmare. The laughter that had filled their home now seemed like a distant memory, replaced by the heavy silence of impending doom. Suddenly, a surge of desperation washed over her. The fear of losing Karan, of being exposed, clawed at her insides. What if Rohan's innocent words brought everything crashing down? She couldn't let that happen. The thrill of her affair with the passion that reignited her spirit felt worth fighting for, even if it meant making an unimaginable choice. With trembling hands, Nisha took a deep breath. The world around her blurred as she focused solely on Rohan. He deserved a happy mother, a mother free from the shackles of shame and fear. She needed to protect her secret, no matter the cost. The adrenaline surged through her veins, drowning out the sense of morality that had governed her actions until this point. In a heartbeat, she made a decision that would alter the course of their lives forever. The innocence of childhood clashed violently with the dark corners of her mind. She approached Rohan again, her heart pounding, each beat echoing the gravity of her choice. They would play a game. She would distract him, make him laugh, and, in doing so, secure her hidden life. She suggested they play hide and seek, a game he loved. Rohan's eyes sparkled with delight at the prospect, and he giggled, oblivious to the storm brewing inside her. As he ran away to find a hiding spot, she felt her heart race faster than it ever had. She led him toward the edge of the terrace, where the game would take a dark turn. Nisha's heart hammered in her chest as she fought against the conflicting emotions swirling inside her. With trembling hands, she lifted Rohan into her arms. Time seemed to slow as she held him close, feeling the warmth of his small body against her, a stark contrast to the icy grip of fear tightening around her heart. Then, in a moment that felt both instantaneous and eternal, she let go. Rohan's giggle turned into a startled cry as he fell through the air. Everything else ceased to exist. She felt paralyzed, unable to breathe, unable to think as she watched him plummet. When Rohan hit the ground, time seemed to freeze. Nisha's heart raced as she ran down the stairs, her mind clouded by disbelief. The world around her blurred into a cacophony of shouts and gasps, the weight of her actions crushing her chest. As she reached Rohan, he lay sprawled on the pavement, his body still and fragile. She knelt beside him, cradling him in her arms, panic gripping her as she called his name, desperate for a response. The sound of approaching footsteps grew louder, and neighbors began to gather, drawn by the chaos. Their faces were a mix of shock and concern, but Nisha was oblivious to their presence. All that mattered was Rohan, whose warmth was slipping away as she rocked him gently, tears streaming down her cheeks. Arjun arrived moments later, having been alerted by a neighbor. His expression shifted from confusion to horror as he rushed to Nisha's side. He knelt beside her, panic evident in his eyes as he took in the scene. Rohan's stillness filled the air with an unbearable silence. Nisha's cries of anguish broke through the shock, her voice cracking as she pleaded for help. The ambulance arrived swiftly, but it was clear that Rohan was beyond saving. Paramedics pronounced him dead at the scene, and Nisha's heart shattered into a million pieces. The weight of the moment pressed heavily on her chest, leaving her gasping for air. She had not just lost her son, she had lost everything that mattered. As the paramedics tended to the scene, Inspector Rajesh Deshmukh arrived, assessing the situation with a practiced eye. He began speaking with witnesses, piecing together the moments leading up to the tragedy. Neighbors whispered among themselves, sharing their theories. Some speculated that Rohan had slipped while playing, while others blamed Nisha's distracted parenting. It seemed everyone was eager to rationalize the unimaginable, to find a reason for the accident that had unfolded before their eyes. Arjun, still kneeling beside Nisha, felt a swirl of emotions. His love for her battled with a rising tide of anger and confusion. He struggled to comprehend how this had happened, how their vibrant son had been reduced to a lifeless form in an instant. As the police conducted their investigation, they spoke with Nisha. Her demeanor was dazed, her words tumbling out in a frantic rush. She spoke of their game of hide and seek, her voice trembling as she recounted how Rohan had run towards the edge of the terrace, how she had only turned her back for a moment. It sounded innocent enough, a tragic accident that could happen to any parent. Inspector Deshmukh listened intently, noting her grief, the way her hands shook as she spoke. The police closed their investigation, labeling Rohan's death as accidental. Months had passed since that tragic day, yet Nisha remained ensnared in a web of guilt and grief. The vibrant laughter of Rohan lingered in her mind, haunting her every thought. The community continued to support her, but Nisha felt increasingly isolated, as if a chasm had formed between her and the world around her. She wore a mask of sorrow, but inside, the turmoil roared. One evening, unable to bear the torment any longer, Nisha sought out Arjun. With trembling hands and a heart racing with dread, she knew she could no longer hide from the truth. Sitting on the edge of their bed, she stared into Arjun's eyes, seeking understanding in his pain. In a moment of desperation, Nisha confessed everything. She spoke of the tragic incident that led to Rohan's death, revealing how her moment of panic and fear had spiraled into something unspeakable. As she laid bare her heart, the weight of her confession felt both liberating and terrifying. Arjun listened in disbelief, his heart shattering as he processed her words. The horror of what she had done settled like a dark cloud between them. Nisha's tears flowed freely as she pleaded for forgiveness, her remorse evident in every word. She expressed how the fear of losing everything had driven her to that fateful decision, a choice made in a moment of overwhelming panic. With a heavy heart, Arjun reached for his phone, knowing what needed to be done. He recorded Nisha's confession, the sound of her anguish piercing through the silence of their home. As he spoke, he could feel the weight of their shared grief and the unbearable reality of their situation. After recording the confession, he made the difficult decision to report it to the police. As the call connected, Arjun's mind raced with thoughts of Rohan, the innocent child whose laughter would never again fill their home. He knew that the authorities would need to hear Nisha's words, that the truth had to come to light, no matter how painful. When the police arrived, they were met with a scene of devastation. Nisha sat in a haze of despair, the gravity of her actions finally sinking in. As they took her away, Arjun watched, torn between his love for his wife and the anguish of losing their child. The courtroom was packed with anticipation as Nisha's trial began. Her face remained pale and withdrawn, a stark contrast to the lively woman she once was. She sat at the defendant's table, flanked by her defense attorney, while the prosecution prepared to lay out their case. The charges were severe. Nisha faced accusations of second-degree murder, though her defense argued for manslaughter, citing diminished capacity due to her mental state. The central question for the court was whether Nisha's actions were premeditated or if they were driven by a moment of emotional breakdown. The prosecution opened with a detailed account of the events leading up to Rohan's death. They emphasized Nisha's affair and how Rohan witnessing her infidelity pushed her into making a deliberate decision to end his life. The prosecution argued that Nisha had ample opportunity to reconsider her actions, but chose to carry them out in cold blood. A forensic psychologist took the stand to discuss how the sequence of events reflected intentionality rather than an impulsive act. The prosecutor's voice was sharp, accusing Nisha of being fully aware of what she had done. Nisha's defense attorney countered these claims, painting a different picture. They focused on Nisha's deteriorating mental health, the strain of her secret affair, and the overwhelming guilt that plagued her. They argued that her mental state had impaired her judgment, and the act was more of a spontaneous breakdown rather than a calculated murder. Expert testimony highlighted Nisha's anxiety and depression and how they had culminated in the fatal incident. The defense also emphasized the absence of a prior history of violence or neglect toward her son, suggesting that Nisha's actions were a momentary lapse, not a reflection of premeditated malice. They pressed for a lesser charge of manslaughter, arguing that she had acted out of fear, guilt, and mental instability. As the trial unfolded, Arjun sat in the gallery, visibly torn. He had once stood by Nisha through every struggle, but the loss of Rohan cast a shadow over everything. The recording he had sent to the police played a pivotal role in the case. Though it was difficult for him to sit through, he knew it was a necessary piece of evidence. The recording captured Nisha's confession and her remorse, but it also underscored the deliberate nature of her actions in the eyes of the prosecution. After several days of testimony and cross-examinations, both sides presented their closing arguments. The prosecution reminded the jury that a child's life had been lost due to Nisha's conscious decision, while the defense urged the jury to consider the emotional and psychological torment she had been under. The jury was instructed by the judge to consider whether Nisha's actions met the criteria for second-degree murder or if the mitigating circumstances warranted a manslaughter conviction. They were also reminded to take into account her mental state at the time of the crime and whether it reduced her culpability. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. The room fell silent as the foreman stood to deliver the decision. Nisha was found guilty of voluntary manslaughter. The verdict reflected the jury's belief that while her actions were deliberate, they were influenced by her emotional and psychological distress, falling short of premeditated murder. Nisha stood as the judge prepared to deliver the sentence. Taking into account the mitigating factors presented by the defense, the judge sentenced her to 12 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 8 years. The judge acknowledged the deep personal and psychological challenges she faced, but emphasized that the law required accountability for the tragic loss of her son's life. As the gavel struck, signaling the end of the trial, Nisha's fate was sealed. She was led away, her shoulders slumped, carrying the weight of her actions. Arjun watched her go, torn between grief, anger, and a lingering sense of love for the woman he had once known.